And we're live. Hello, everyone. I just want to thank my guests for joining me. I am Stefan Delavo, president of the Caribbean Blockchain Alliance. We're an NGO, non-governmental organization. We're trying to build the blockchain community and the blockchain infrastructure in the Caribbean. So we focus on two mandates, which is education and public policy. And actually, I think we're just going to go right into it. So as you can see, we have, I'll start with Commissioner Peirce, and I'll start with her bio. Commissioner Hester Peirce is the Commissioner of the Securities and Exchange Commission of the United States. Prior to joining the SEC, she conducted research on the regulation of financial markets at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. She was a Senior Counsel on the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, where she advised Ranking Member Richard Shelby and other members of the Committee on Securities Issues. Commissioner Peirce served as a counsel to SEC Commissioner Paul Atkins. She also worked as a staff attorney in the SEC's Division of Investment Management. Commissioner Peirce was an associate at Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering, now WilmerHale, and clerked for Judge Roger Andewelt on the Court of Federal Claims. Commissioner, do you want to say something?
Sure, thanks, Stefan, and thanks to the Caribbean Blockchain Alliance for the chance to be with you all today. It's really a delight. I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys what is in your region. I think that it's good for me, from my perspective, to hear what other jurisdictions are trying to achieve and how they're trying to go about it. We have a lot to learn from others. It's sometimes a bit daunting to try to come up with a regulatory regime for a whole new asset class. And so it's something that I think we need to be talking to our international counterparts about. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I do have to give you a little bit of a disclaimer, which is that my views are my own views and not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners at the SEC.
Of course. And I think we have a lot to learn from each other. So definitely looking forward to this conversation and future conversations. So now we have Mr. Trevor Forrest. Trevor Forrest is the founder CEO of 876 Technology Solutions, which provides public and private sector companies with integrated business technology solutions that will help them to successfully digitally transform, still increase business productivity, efficiency, and profitability. He is among the few certified blockchain architects in the region. Mr. Forrest has served as a senior technology advisor at the Ministry of Science and Technology in Jamaica, where he spearheaded many groundbreaking government policy initiatives. Mr. Forrest has served on numerous ICT groups and committees and as a director on various ICT-related boards. Trevor, you can give a quick introduction or say any intro words. Oh, you're muted, sorry.
Well, let me first of all, thank the CBA for inviting me to share the stage with Commissioner Peirce. And, I think, the exchange should be really informative. We're doing a lot of stuff in the Caribbean, but there's a lot for us to learn, especially when we're talking about digital assets and the global impact that we have. My area of excitement really is blockchain, which is the underlying technology. So I hope to be able to contribute to the discussion in that way. And I'm really honored to be sharing the stage with Commissioner. This is, really exciting discussion.
I'm glad you're excited. We're excited too. So we can just jump into it. And just so everyone knows, we were kind of talking earlier about the fact that the entire last year has just been Zoom call after Zoom call. So we want to make this as easygoing and relaxed as possible for everybody. So we'll basically just go right into the Q&A. So first, to start off with, we're just going to talk very generally about your perspectives on the digital asset industry, the blockchain crypto industry as a whole. What do you think about it? What is your perspective, just in a very general sense, on what's happening in the space? We can start with Commissioner Peirce.
I was going to say, Trevor, you should go first.
All right, Trevor.
Okay, so I'll start. So I mean, I'll start talking about blockchain, and I mean, no holds barred. I feel blockchain is the next big thing, next greatest thing since sliced bread, and I mean, I'll talk about it every day. But I think, given where we're going now, when we're talking about moving into the digital space in sort of a ubiquitous way, and countries looking to become digital societies, one of the most important components of that is ensuring that the same level of confidence that exists currently with traditional financial systems or traditional ways of doing business passes through to doing things in the digital domain. And I think for us to succeed in that space, we have to have systems and technologies and understanding, and of course, confidence that the systems that are there, will ensure that, whatever we're exchanging, whatever business we're doing, whatever transactions we're undertaking can be trusted. And I think, at the core of all of that is blockchain technology, which its underlying core purpose is to instill trust and confidence in these sorts of transactions, because anything digital is very malleable and very portable. And, very interesting things can happen to all things digital. So engendering a certain level of trust in the system is important. And I think both the infrastructure, the technologies, the legislation, and the regulatory environment all play a key role in ensuring that there's a certain level of trust and confidence as we move forward into the digital realm.
I like that point, actually, because you're speaking basically about the entire space on a holistic level, which includes the developers, the managers, if they're necessary, but also the regulations and just all the different interactions that play into, whether it's public sector or private sector, and how things get done and how the technology gets introduced and used by everyone. No, I really like that point. Commissioner?
Yeah, and from my perspective, I mean, look, I'm not a technologist, I'm a regulator. So my understanding is always a bit limited of what the technology is capable of doing. But one of the things that really excites me is to see so many really of the smartest going into this area and getting very excited about what they can build potentially using blockchain technology. And so I think we've seen a lot of experimenting with it. Some of it has fallen by the wayside. Some grand plans for maybe how the technology could be used have fallen by the wayside, and others are now thinking of new ways to use the technology. But it certainly is a lot of fun to watch people trying to think about how it can be used. And for me, one of the most interesting pieces of it is that it really does add this new layer to the internet. So the internet has been transformative in all of our lives, or at least those of us who were born and lived a significant chunk of our lives before the internet was really a thing. We saw how that transformed our lives. And I think now adding this layer where you've got kind of an ability to transfer value is a really powerful thing. And it's a potential way to help bring the world closer together in a way that I think is really powerful, that you can have people really contributing to a project without having to be in the same place. I mean, you really literally never have to be in the same place, and you can be building something together, and you can be sharing the value together. You can have people getting paid in a form of payment that can be used no matter where you are. So I think that's a potentially quite powerful concept. I think this concept of being able to decentralize things is also a very powerful concept, which I think, ties into, Trevor, what you were saying about you need to have some form of trust or some mechanism for allowing something to be trustless. And that's something that we just haven't had until now. And so the ability to say, you know what, some things that we do in our lives, we really don't want them to be centralized. We want there to be a decentralized way of doing these things, so that power isn't resting in one particular institution. And I think that's a really promising way to address some of the concerns that people have seen when they see too much power concentrating in one place. And that will have an effect on the financial industry. Obviously, financial intermediaries are very important, and I don't think they're going away. But there are instances in which it might make more sense to do something in a decentralized fashion rather than through a financial intermediary. So where the technology is going to take greatest hold and how long it's going to take, I think it's going to be a long process of experimentation to see where it makes sense and where centralization really makes more sense.
No, those are great points, because for an example, in the Caribbean, we have a huge de-risking problem, and that's something that this industry and decentralization can really help with. And then a few other things you said, such as, the idea of not just decentralization, but also just value. I think the first time, it was very early when I was getting involved in this space, and I heard blockchains basically being called the Internet of Value, and that basically changed my entire perspective. And that, I think that was one of the things that really got me interested. And just the idea, and just the fact that this industry it's a bit over 10 years old, which is still new in a lot of ways. And just the understanding that a lot of these things are still experiments and still very experimental. And I think that just that understanding is great for regulators to say, okay, we can make sure people aren't getting hurt by this, but we can also make sure that people can actually build these things before we dive too deep into it. It's an interesting balance, but I think it's a very powerful balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that point is an important one, because in today's day and age, we tend to be very cautious. I think as a society, certainly in the United States, that's true. We're very cautious, and we don't want people to get hurt. And so there's always a little bit of a desire to try to not let people take risks, because when people take risks, they might get hurt. And I think it's important to approach anything that we're looking at as regulators and say, look, we're going to do our best to make sure that people are going in eyes wide open when they make a decision to use a product or service or to engage with a particular kind of technology. But ultimately, we want the decision to be theirs. We want the risks to be clearly laid out, and we want them to make that decision about whether the risk is worth their taking, rather than trying to step in and say, no, we're not even going to let the innovation happen because we know some things, some people could get hurt, which again is an understandable reaction from a regulator. We are trying to make the markets work for as many people as possible and prevent as much harm as we can.
No, for sure. And that's an excellent point. I think and hope that that's something that everyone kind of grabs onto, that approach to it, because that's how we move forward. That's how we innovate. That's how we make sure that actually change industries for the better, really. And I think that's a perfect segue into the next question. This is a bit more of a regulatory question, so we'll start with you, Commissioner. But Trevor, I definitely want your opinion on this as well. When you look at these digital assets, these cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, et cetera, how would there's still a huge conversation about how these should be, well, globally, how these should be categorized, classified, et cetera. Would love to get thoughts on that. Like, how do you think, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, or an NFT or what have you, how do you think they should be categorized and classified at the end of the day?
It's a difficult question, and I think part of the reason that's difficult is that we've got different regulatory regimes. And in the United States, our regulatory regime for securities is intentionally quite broad, so that we can capture anything where someone is selling something and saying, look, invest your money with me, and I'll put your money together with other people's money, and I'll build something great, and you'll get returns. I'm not going to ask you to do any work. If someone does that, then in the United States, we consider that to be capital raising, and that falls under our purview. But I think one of the things that we've done is we've really conflated the idea that of the offering being a securities offering and the token itself being a security, and that I think has gotten us a little bit down a road that's a difficult road to be on, because once we consider the token itself to be a security, it becomes really hard to move that token from one person to another without having to comply with a whole set of securities regulations. So I really think we in the United States need to take a step back and really think about how we're trying to classify these things, and whether the approach that we've taken thus far is the right approach. Different countries have taken different approaches, so you see the same crypto assets being labeled as a security in one place and as something else in another place. And so that can be very confusing, and it can also be confusing that you might even have two regulators in the same country who are treating something, calling something by a different name, because the way the regulatory regimes are written, something could actually fall within two of them or multiple regimes. And so it's really a very difficult area for people to wade into, because there's so many regulators involved. I think we see that when when the Libra project came to light, you saw that governments from all over the world were weighing in and saying, oh, we have something to say about this. And so it is really hard to just launch something massive like that without really wading through a lot of regulatory thickets.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because when you have something that's decentralized, it's automatically global. So that means you have to bring everybody in at the same time. So yeah, I can imagine that gets very difficult. And I really hope we can kind of get to more of a comfortable position or a standard or multiple standards for these, which I know a lot of people are working on. But I do think it's coming for sure.
I mean, I take a deliberately broader view of the whole concept of what you brought up, and I do that because when we look at the fundamentals of what a digital asset is, and I was speaking to a colleague who called and said, well, what's going on with this whole cryptocurrency thing? And what I try to do is I try to explain as best I can for the layman how this thing really has an impact. And I think it first begins with understanding how vast the concept of a digital asset is, because a lot of times we get pigeonholed into talking about it from a financial standpoint purely. But in fact, it's anything that exists in a digital form. So it could be a document, it could be an MP3 music file, anything that exists in the digital form. Now, when we talk about exchanging value, we're talking about exchanging value of something that we can't touch and feel. And people have a real problem grasping that concept, because one of the biggest things that you'll always get asked about, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin is, how does Bitcoin get its value? So Bitcoin is like, probably about 48,000 right now, but how do you get its value? Because people can't see and touch it like they can touch, a paper bill. So one of the things, if we can understand the length and breadth of a digital asset, and the fact that you can be trading that many things, right, that are in that form, then one of the things that have to contemplate is, how do I make sure that when I'm exchanging this new form of value with somebody else, that I actually get what I want, and the other person on the other side gets what they want or gets what they're supposed to get. And when you're looking at that in the digital realm, it's very complex, and it's very important now to look at ensuring that you have the right systems, ensuring that you define certain things, because Commissioner was saying, you could be in one jurisdiction and different regulators are defining the same thing in two different ways.
Right.
So you want to make sure you have things that are defined in such a way that people understand clearly what they are. The legislations must be in place to guide how, assets in a digital form are defined. Even as basic as saying, look, define what a smart contract is, because in the digital realm, you're now operating using rules called smart contracts that themselves need to be defined. And they have to be defined legislatively or in a regulatory sense. So what we're talking about is ensuring that when we're transitioning from a state that we can touch and feel into a state that we can't see or touch the stuff, that we maintain some frameworks and some rules that will ensure that when I'm exchanging the value or the perceived value, that I'm still protected. And if we don't have that, then what you want to achieve, which is wholesale use across borders without the middlemen, with hyper efficiency, it's not going to happen. So it's extremely important in my view, this topic where we're talking about digital asset regulation, because if you can't ensure that the people who are going to be participating in this exchange are they feel safe about doing it and not, losing a whole lot of value or money, it's not going to work. And I think this is very important. A discussion like this is extremely important for that.
Yeah, and thus the importance of regulatory frameworks and standards. And on this a similar kind of note, if you can very quickly say, if you had to choose, speaking of all these applications of blockchain and crypto, et cetera, if you had to choose one thing, one application that you find most interesting, what would it be?
When you say one application, you mean one application of blockchain technology?
Yeah.
Oh,
in a general sense.
That's a lot. Wow. I don't think I can do that.
No problem.
It's there's so many. What I will tell you is I think the most interesting use of blockchain is not in fintech. I'll tell you that. I can go that far, but as to zeroing in on one, I don't know. There's so many that are so interesting and so fascinating. I don't if I can just zero in on one.
Completely fair.
I'll have to take the other side of that and say I think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening on the fintech side, both in DeFi. I think it's interesting to see what's happening there. I think certainly some of the stores of value that people are creating and figuring out how to exchange with one another, and experimenting with how that can be used. But I think from a securities regulator perspective, there's some pretty difficult problems in our regulatory space that we've long looked for solutions to, and I don't know. I mean, again, it's early to tell. It's probably too early to tell, and it's difficult to see how some of these things will play out. But having securities, for example, tokenized could open up opportunities like a better transfer agent model, because if you actually have everything there on the blockchain and in a distributed ledger, the role of the transfer agent changes quite dramatically. Or we are looking at proxy plumbing, and this is the way that shareholders vote their shares. Those kinds of things could be transformed by this technology. A lot of people are talking about ways that distributed ledger could be used in proxy plumbing. So some of these areas are ones that we'll see. I mean, we had a lot of attention in recent weeks on some of the issues around long settlement periods in the securities industry. So query whether this technology can be useful in shortening those periods and maybe smoothing some of the back office functions now. It's possible that the technology could be useful there. We have to be careful because I think with any new technology, you're sometimes thinking this is going to solve every problem I've ever had. You've got to do a cost benefit analysis. You've got to also think about, maybe it isn't the solution to the problem over here, but it might help over here. And so I think, I think Trevor made this important point, which is that if people have a bad experience with something, it's going to be really problematic, and they're not going to want to interact with that technology again. So along those same lines, I think we need to be realistic with people that this isn't the magic bullet solution to every problem that we have, but it's one that we can explore using to solve some of these really intractable problems.
Yeah, the exploration aspect is most important, and especially for the Caribbean, where not all, but a good chunk of our countries are very focused on, obviously you have tourism first for the most part, but for a lot of our countries, we have finance as a large industry here. So, and to be completely honest, it's an industry that globally has been stagnating in some ways. Obviously, depending on which country you're in, but that it is happening. And for the Caribbean to embrace DeFi, for them to actually look into, these liquidity pools and these lending pools and whatnot, it could basically revitalize in a lot of ways. And like you said, it's not a cure-all, but it does provide a lot of different opportunities. And the settlement aspect you brought up, which, the Robin Hood effect that has made this popular. It's something that could really, really push things forward in the DeFi space and bring it to the forefront. So yeah, that's an excellent point.
So since you guys are going hard on the DeFi side, let me try to speak to some interesting applications.
Go ahead.
So, but one of the things, so let me speak in the context of some of the things that play out in Jamaica, and also in the wider Caribbean. One of the things we have a huge problem with is efficiency and bureaucracy, right, within government. And one of the things that I think, blockchain technology and decentralized way of doing things can help to accomplish is to make a lot of the processes, one, less bureaucratic, more trusted, and more efficient. So let's take, for example, the simple operation of getting a land title. I've had I've had to deal with that experience before, and it literally took weeks to get the title for some land that I own and actually to get the title for this house. And one of the things that I observed during that entire process was there was a human factor that was in place, and it was in place because we needed to ensure that certain things were done and certain things were checked at every point where a human interacted, okay? And I think when you start to look at the advantages that a digital platform and technology such as blockchain has over some of the more traditional digital platforms, you start to see where, operations that take, days or in some places weeks goes down to, mere minutes, because you're functioning entirely in the digital domain with something that underlies or underpins it in a very trustworthy way. I think the kinds of efficiencies that you start to see, you don't see long lines outside of the land office. You don't see long lines outside of the tax office because now you can. I mean, if you see some of the lines that we have, especially in light of COVID, outside of our or various tax offices, you wouldn't believe it. You think they're having a party, right? But when you can now establish frameworks and systems that are built on extremely trustworthy and hyper efficient platforms, then what you start to see is, things happen faster, things happen in a more trustworthy way, and you start to see an even more important thing called innovation, because now it's like you've opened an entirely new door, an entirely new set of floodgates that will allow you to, start to create some new things and some new ways of exchanging with value. And that has always been the challenge. I mean, the internet revolutionized how we exchange info. I mean, I've never handwritten a letter and put it in the mail, since I was probably 6 or 7 years old, right? That's about 40 years ago. We all do it by email or text message, and it happens instantaneously. Think about that kind of revolution when you're talking about exchanging any sort of value asset with a person. Anything that currently takes, an extremely long time to occur would suddenly get the effect of what the internet did to handwriting or typing a letter, going to the post office and putting it in the mail and waiting for somebody to get in a number of days or weeks. That's where I think the technology in the form of blockchain and how it allows digital assets to be manipulated is extremely important and very exciting.
No, that's a great point. Because, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say, I think that sort of Trevor's highlighted a point that I think is helpful in figuring out where it's useful and where it may not be, in the sense that, if removing the human element is helpful and will make things more efficient, that's kind of where this technology comes into play. There's some areas where we want to keep the human discretion involved. Yeah. And those are areas that, we probably better be careful, because it's really hard to reverse these transactions once they happen in this space. So that can help us to think where it might be useful.
Absolutely.
No, these are great points. And it's a good point, just because down here we are still largely analog. A lot of our ministries and departments still run mostly by paper. So, skipping ahead, and Trevor, what you brought up about the land titles, that system is, I think, across the board still riddled with problems. So we could talk all day about that, but it is something that this can literally, I mean, leapfrog is going to come up over and over. This is what we need to do to leapfrog these issues and to bring us into, the 21st century finally. But yeah, no, absolutely. But
another exciting area is in the area of entertainment. And when I say entertainment, I mean music and the creative industry, because the Caribbean is a melting pot of creativity. Reggae music, dancehall music, soca music, all of these different genres that originate in the Caribbean. One of the things that we have not quite gotten yet is how to get our creative works into the digital space in a profitable way. And I think one of the advantages, and again, we're talking about digital assets, because gone are the days when you had to go to a record store to get a record. Gone are the days when you had to you had to go to the store to get a CD. You don't do that anymore. And what that has done is it has changed the business model of people who used to make that stuff. So now you start to find that artists and creatives in general have to explore new ways of getting their creations, which are now, the tangible form of that is digital. How do you get that out there? And how do you make sure that when you put it out there, you actually get compensated for every time that digital asset is used. Because right now, and it's the same problem the music industry faced when CDs came out. And then when CD duplicators came out. The fact was, I could buy a CD once, and it could be duplicated, and you could give your friends for free, and that had a huge impact on the recording industry. It's a similar thing now, where creatives, artists, musicians, and so on are battling, the realities of the digital space because there is no way for them to ensure that their creations will come back to them in a monetary form. Again, the technology will facilitate that when you build platforms that allow you to ensure that the only time the value is exchanged is when there's a bi-directional benefit. And that's, again, is very important.
And it's very exciting because that problem is being solved in real time. The NFT space, which is non-fungible tokens for musicians and for artists, is exploding right now. And I think just between now and the end of the year, we're going to see a lot of extremely interesting things, which would completely solve all the problems you were talking about. So yeah, I'm very excited to see that. And I think a talk on NFTs for us is going to be a bit down the pipeline, where we do we have a few talks for NFTs and DeFi and things like that are coming up. But I just saw the time, so I want to push ahead a bit. But given that you want to get our governments and our regulators to really embrace these things, these new technologies, and of course we have to deal with a lot of skepticism, a lot of pushback. So for both of you, whether it's your peers in the regulatory space, or peers in government, or even peers in industry, what do you think is the best way? Or for someone like me who's on the, I don't like to use the word lobbying side, but best word for it, what is the best way to kind of bring them in and get them to understand what's going on and that they should embrace it and not push away from it?
Well, I think we were talking before we went live about the importance of education, and I think that's really where you have to start. I mean, I was introduced to Bitcoin before I got into the current role that I'm in, and having that runway of having it explained to me. And I was just thinking when Trevor was talking earlier about there's nothing physical there. And I remember when I first heard about Bitcoin, I said, well, but don't they give you some kind of a physical token to go with it just to make you know that you own something? And so, you've got to get people over that initial, shock at sort of how new and different this is. And you've got to move them into, understanding what some of the potential uses are. And then I think it's also really important to show people that this is an area where a lot of intellectual capital is being poured right now. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason that, again, I'm not advocating for any technology, but I think you do have to look when you see a lot of really smart people spending a lot of their time there. And so the efforts that you're making, I think, with the younger generation are also important, because the younger generation then talk to their parents, and their parents are regulators, so that can be helpful for them. And then I think just recognizing the fact that, as with everything else in our lives, there's going to be regulation. So it makes sense to work with us to figure out what regulation will work. We at the SEC have a FinHub, we call it, which is an office where you can come in and talk to us and tell us what you're trying to build, and sort of get an idea of where the potential securities laws issues might be, although you got to ultimately hire your own lawyer. But it does help you to kind of get a start, and it helps to educate us as well about some of the ideas that are out there. So I think that conversation is really valuable. But, it's incumbent upon the regulators too to have open ears and open doors, and not just to shut the doors and say, well, we've got a regulatory framework that has worked pretty well for a long time, so why do you need to do anything different? I mean, I think you all are in a little bit of a better position, actually, because, as you said, if you can figure out a way to leapfrog and move past some of the older technologies, we we have a really old regulatory framework. And so it's much harder for us to modernize that because it's so well established.
Yeah, no, and because just like you said, we have the ability to move quicker. We just need to have the will and the drive to do it. And that was a great point about parents and their kids, because kids right now, especially with some of the things, not just in the crypto aspect, but for sure the NFT aspect, they're going to be talking to their parents about these things. So yeah, that's easily the best way. And there's just so much opportunity and so much great things that are going to come out of this. And the hub aspect that you brought up, I think that's excellent, because it kind of brings out this kind of sandbox environment where you're getting to know the industry better, and the industry is getting to know you better, and you can basically converge on certain topics and certain issues. So I think that's easily a great way to go about it. So yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think the education aspect is very important. I think what Commissioner brought up with the children and the parents in the regulatory role, I'm gonna steal that. Okay, I'm just gonna let you know. I mean, no, my son Liam right now, he, when you look at some of the games these kids play online, a lot of the games have things that, called V-Bucks, and it's kind of inculcating that kind of, thinking already. But I think, here, especially here in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, the central bank has already started to embrace the possibilities. They've set up a sandbox to explore, a CBDC, and the possibilities of creating one locally. The other thing that I'm personally excited about is the Jamaica Stock Exchange has been, it's very far along in its efforts to look at STOs and how trading in that realm can occur. So they're working, with this block station to figure out how to implement that kind of thing. There's a lot going on in the Caribbean, in Bahamas. I mean, they recently launched one of the first, if not the first, CBDC in the world. A lot of fanfare around that one, but it's been done. And they have legislation. They've actually created the legislation around this kind of thing. So I think, collaboration within the region, further educating people about what this environment means, what it can do. There's a lot of times we talk about CARICOM. There are huge possibilities for CARICOM as it relates to this kind of environment. So I think education is the main component. I spend a lot of time trying to educate people about the technology and the pros and cons of the space, because with this new technology, with this very fluid and dynamic environment, you have to always accept and realize that there is a huge door, and there's a lot of room for nefarious activity, especially if you don't fully understand what it is you're being sold. So there's a lot of good stuff, but there's the potential for a lot of negative stuff to come in, because you have a lot of people who, because of their understanding, but because of their nefarious thinking, will take advantage of people's limited understanding, and that can put a damper on the entire environment, because again, once people have a bad experience, especially in technology, they're not going to want to continue to engage, and that slows things down badly.
And look, I mean, I think that point is really important. We've seen a lot of bad activity in the United States with crypto, or I mean, a lot of it actually is not with crypto. It's with people who are saying they're doing crypto and they're just taking your money to do whatever they want with it. That's not crypto. But, unfortunately, a lot of people were too willing to give their money without asking questions. You got to ask questions. And that's no matter what you're investing in, you have to ask questions. But I think that whole set of problems that we've seen in the United States has also colored regulators' view of this industry. And that's also a barrier that has to be gotten over so that, regulators don't think that anything related to crypto is nefarious, but that there's actually there are actually people trying to build things that are societally beneficial in the space. So that's an unfortunate series of events that's happened in this industry. But whatever people do, some people are going to use it for bad, and some people are going to use it for good.
No, these are very interesting points, and I mean, there have obviously been quite a few scams in the industry, or the industry adjacent people that are saying they're using crypto but aren't, and just have some MLM somewhere, or some pyramid schemes and Ponzi schemes and whatnot. And it's of course very important for the industry itself to kind of set the standard, or to kind of specify saying, okay, this is a very legit company and this is a scam. So the education aspect is extremely important on all sides, and it makes sure that we're also very active and very involved. And it's maybe a bit controversial, but it is interesting to see people's actions after dealing with something going wrong. And there are basically two things that happen. Either they say, okay, I don't want anything to do with this space, or they say, okay, I've learned from this and now I can be a bit more cognizant and be a bit more intelligent in terms of how I interact with this. So that's always very interesting to see. And I definitely hope that, going forward, there's more of the latter than the former. But obviously it's very important to push out the scams in any way possible. And I think both of you answered very well, just in terms of what we can learn from each other. Trevor talked about the CBDCs coming out of the Bahamas, for example, which launched end of last year. I think the Eastern Caribbean CBDC, I believe the first payment was actually done today. So it's very exciting to see. And then like we talked about before we started, just the idea that, we have a few countries that already have our, digital asset regulation, and we're pushing to get more and more involved, more and more countries involved, and doing it in a way that it's done a bit more together, a bit more unified. So it's not piece by piece, but yeah, there's a lot of work to do, but I'm very optimistic, and I really like where things are going. But I will actually open up to, because we do have a YouTube audience down here, so I'll open up to any audience questions that anyone may have. But in the meantime, if any of you want to talk about, how you think a bit more about how we should learn from each other, or.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the security token offering point, that the Jamaican Stock Exchange is moving forward with something like that, those kinds of things can be very helpful for us to learn about in the United States. It can be, same with Canada just approved an exchange traded fund, a Bitcoin exchange traded fund. And so we will learn from the experience that they have with that. We'll learn from what happens in Jamaica. We'll learn from the fact that, some of these CBDCs are now in use. I think those kinds of things can be really valuable for us as we're thinking through what might the potential problems be. So that's for us an important area. And I welcome feedback from people who have worked on the digital asset regulatory frameworks down there, because again, although we're coming to it slightly differently because we do have this established framework of rules in the United States, it's helpful to hear how other people have thought through those problems and have figured out what kind of regime will work well. In the United States, we have states like Wyoming that are really moving forward quite fast, and I think we can learn from the approaches they're taking as well.
Yeah.
So I'll just quickly say I've been following Caitlin long, and she's been doing so many amazing things in this space. So yeah, it's definitely great to see, one or a few people or one or a few states coming up that can kind of push everyone else. And obviously that's the same thing that we're kind of seeing here in this region. We have a few countries that, that we're hoping will push everyone else to really embrace the space. Sorry, Trevor.
Yeah, man, no, what I wanted to kind of touch on, and I'm interested in hearing Commissioner's views on this. In some of the fora that I've been part of that speaks to DeFi and CBDC specifically. One of the concerns and challenges that have always been expressed is the effect that the concept of CBDCs will have on commercial banks. Because, when you talk about, just decentralized financing, removing the middleman, what kind of effect does, the advent of CBDCs have on removing, in this case, the middleman, which would be the central bank? Because when you look at how things can shape up, central banks would really become boutique now because of how things can be shaped. And it's always a concern because in some jurisdictions, people are wedded to a bank in various interesting ways. I mean, I know in Jamaica here, you have people who really go to the bank just to make sure that the money is actually there. They'll go through the door just to, can I see my money? Okay, great. Here it is, put it back in the vault, right? So when we're talking about, the effect of what the interaction between central bank CBDCs and the effect it will have on commercial banks, I'm curious. It's a concern that I have, and I'm kind of split on that. But I'm curious as to the Commissioner's views and as to where things could turn as it relates to the advent of CBDC. Because personally, I believe it's kind of almost a double-edged sword, depending on how you craft and frame the thing. So I think it's something that is on many minds, and it's an ongoing discussion. And I figured I'd pose it to the Commissioner to get your views.
Well, so CBDCs are a little bit outside of my purview, but I have been following the discussion, and I think there's several things. I mean, one is the one you mentioned. What does it mean for the central bank? What does it mean for commercial banks? But I think one way to think about it, and I was listening to Chris Giancarlo, who used to be the chairman of the CFTC, and now he's working on a CBDC, trying to push the U.S. toward a CBDC, among other things. And I think he paints it as being more of an infrastructure question. If you really want your economy to be a digital economy, you've got to build the infrastructure, and one piece of that might be the CBDC. There's a lot of activity in the United States with stable coins, which are sort of, the private version. And I think they allow a lot of the DeFi activity to happen. It's happening because stable coins are there. I think another concern that lots of people are talking about is the privacy concern, because you can imagine a situation in which everyone is just sort of transacting in the CBDC, and the government is able to see everything you do. It's all there for everyone to see, right? And that poses a lot of privacy challenges too. So I think there are a lot of questions to be asked, but generally I find that with financial technology, and I don't know how this will work out, but with financial technology that seems to be, the threat is that it's going to do away with the existing financial system. In many cases, what happens is the existing financial system finds a way to use it to make it to make the financial system more efficient. And so maybe talent moves to a new place, but there's still work to be done, and so the new technology just makes people more efficient. But we'll see. I don't know how it will all turn out. I haven't had a chance to talk with the Fed what their thoughts are on it.
Yeah, but that's a great point. Just kind of, we have CBDs on one side and we have stable coins on the other. They do very similar things. So it will be interesting to see how they interact, going forward, and which countries focus more on either one. We do have a few questions. I think we only have time for one, unfortunately, but we'll just go with this one. The first one, what would be your advice to people who would like to launch, say, an exchange or a fintech platform, or just a blockchain infrastructure platform for, say, the Caribbean? And what would be the best way for them as an individual or as a small company to really interact with regulators and government, where they may feel like they're a bit distant from those entities, and it may be hard for them to get to the table or get inside the door or something like that. Either.
Well, I think, let me speak to the environment in Jamaica as it relates to the last part of the question, and I'll jump to the first part. But the central bank here has set up, a sandbox that is open to anybody who wants to, test out what they're looking to do in that kind of space. So, and I think it's extremely advantageous, and it was a bold move by the central bank here to do that. But it's testament to the insight and the foresight that they have. As it relates to building out, the infrastructure and so on, two things I would strongly suggest there is: do a lot of homework and make sure you build it right the first time. Because if you don't get it right the first time, it's not a situation, especially when you're dealing with blockchain-based platforms, it is not a situation where you can, change things on the fly and it continues to work. It does not work that way. You have to do considerable amount of work and homework to make sure that what you're building, you get it right the first time, because once you put it in place, changing it is going to be a big problem. So that's really, from an architectural standpoint, being a blockchain architect, that's my biggest piece of advice. Take the time to get it right the first time. It will save you a lot in the medium to long term.
That's good advice. Commissioner, I know this isn't your region, but.
Well, I think my advice would be just, don't be scared to talk to the regulators. They want to learn from you too. They want to hear from you, I think is generally the case. But I would say that you should have I think Trevor's advice is great. You should be careful when you're building, and before you go into the regulator, you should have thought through things carefully, and you should have all your ducks in a row so that when you go in, their first impression of you is one that, you've thought about the positives and you've thought about the negatives, and you're working on furthering the positives and mitigating the negatives. I think they want to know that you're cognizant of the fact that that you need to take steps to make sure that you're not going to cause any kind of broader problems in the financial system or harm your customers.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. And to add to both of those answers, talk to the Caribbean Blockchain Alliance. That's what we're here for. But we're going to wrap up, but very quickly, maybe final words from both of you, maybe just a minute each. Commissioner.
Well, I just want to thank you both. I think this has been a really fun conversation, and I hope that we'll be able to continue it. I hope that we'll be able to continue to learn from one another, from one another's mistakes and successes. So I'm looking forward to, we hope 2021 will be a better year in a lot of ways, but I hope it'll be a year of a lot of progress in this space as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo the commissioner's sentiments. I mean, there's a lot going on. There is still a lot to be learned. It's very exciting. I'm very excited because, you know, one of the things, you know, like my company, we're gonna start doing is, one of our goals is to become a blockchain as a service provider, so that, you know, we can aid, you know, people in building all these things. And I think there is so much activity and so much room for everybody to learn from everyone, that it is extremely important for the discussion to happen in a public space. And, you know, I really like what the Caribbean Blockchain Alliance is doing, because it's important to have a forum like this to allow people to be able to ask questions, to learn, to have, you know, eminent panelists such as the commissioner, you know, here talking about these things, so that, again, people start to get confidence and trust in how these new ecosystems that we're building will become part of our everyday existence. And I really want to thank the CBA for doing that and for inviting us to talk about it. There's a lot more discussions to be had.
Absolutely.
Really hope that we can continue to contribute ways like this.
Definitely. Well, thank you both, Trevor Forrest, Commissioner Peirce. Thank you both so much for joining us. To the audience, this video will be on our YouTube page as well. So if you want to go back and listen to it or share it. But thank you both so much. Oh, sorry. You're welcome. Cheers all.